Rusty was the kind of dog who seemed born with sunshine in his soul. A sturdy golden retriever with a shimmering coat the color of autumn leaves and eyes that sparkled with a mix of mischief and wisdom, he had that classic retriever charm, the kind that melted even the most indifferent hearts. For most of his life, Rusty had been the heartbeat of his family's home. He was the first one up every morning, tail thumping against the floor as he waited for the sound of footsteps down the hallway. He had his rituals, bringing slippers to his human dad, nudging the front door open just enough to let a beam of light in while he waited for the neighborhood kids to pass by so he could greet them with a bark that was more of a conversation than a warning. Rusty loved the park. That was his kingdom. Every tree was a familiar friend, every blade of grass held the memory of 1,000 joyful sprints. He would bolt across the open field like a golden bullet, ears flapping, tongue lolling, until he collapsed in a heap of happy exhaustion beside his favorite old tree. But time, as it always does, had its own plans. It started gradually, a slower rise in the morning, a hesitant step before a jump. Then came the stiffness, the occasional wince when he climbed the porch stairs. At first, his family thought it was just a fluke, maybe Rusty had just played a little too hard the day before. But then came the day he stopped mid-walk, sat down in the middle of the sidewalk, and refused to go any further. That wasn't like Rusty. A visit to the vet confirmed what his family feared, arthritis in both hips. It wasn't unusual for a dog his age, the vet explained gently. Rusty was 10 now, no longer a young pup, though in his heart he still thought he was. The arthritis was making movement painful, and over time, if left untreated, it could severely limit his mobility. His family left the clinic that day with a weight in their hearts. They knew they had to do something. They couldn't bear the thought of Rusty, their energetic, joyful boy, slowly retreating into pain and stillness. The vet recommended laser therapy and dietary supplements. It won't be a miracle overnight, she said, but it can make a big difference. Especially if we catch it now. Laser therapy? It sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie. But the vet explained that it was a non-invasive treatment that could reduce inflammation and stimulate healing. Rusty's family didn't hesitate. They scheduled his first session for the following week. The veterinary clinic had a small, calming room where the therapy would take place. Rusty was hesitant at first. He didn't like being away from his people. But once he was lying on the padded table, with a soft blanket under him and the warm hum of the laser machine filling the room, something seemed to click. The technician gently stroked his fur, speaking to him in a low, soothing voice as the laser passed over his hips. It wasn't painful. If anything, Rusty seemed intrigued. His eyes half closed, and for the first time in weeks, his body visibly relaxed. The sessions became a routine. Twice a week, then once a week. Each time, Rusty seemed to grow more comfortable, more himself. At home, his tail began wagging a little higher, his steps a little stronger. They added glucosamine and chondroitin supplements to his meals, hidden in peanut butter, of course, which Rusty considered a gourmet delight. Within a month, the difference was undeniable. One morning, his human mom looked out the kitchen window and gasped. Rusty was trotting, actually trotting, around the yard, his tennis ball clenched proudly in his mouth. He hadn't done that in weeks. Maybe months. He still had his off days. Some mornings, he took longer to get up. On colder days, he moved a bit slower. But the pain no longer seemed to define him. Rusty had begun to reclaim the parts of his life he'd once surrendered to discomfort. He resumed his morning patrols of the backyard, returned to his post at the front window where he watched the mail truck with serious dedication, and even started barking again when someone dared to walk past the house without giving him attention. Then came the day they returned to the park. Rusty's leash jingled in the hallway, and he turned with ears perked and eyes wide. His family wasn't sure if he could handle it, but they wanted to try. The moment his paws touched the familiar grass, Rusty paused. He sniffed the air, looked around. Then, slowly, he walked forward. Not the sprinting blur he once was, but he moved with purpose, with confidence. He even broke into a lopsided, joyful run after a squirrel, barking like he had something very important to say. Strangers at the park who hadn't seen him in months stopped and smiled. "Is that Rusty? Wow, he looks great," one said. Another woman knelt to scratch behind his ears. "You've still got it, old man." Rusty just leaned into her touch, his tail sweeping the ground like a golden metronome. Back home, he collapsed onto his favorite rug with a happy sigh. His family sat with him, gently rubbing his back, overwhelmed with gratitude, for the vet, for the therapy, for the chance to see their best friend light up again. That night, as Rusty snored softly at the foot of their bed, his family felt something shift. This wasn't just about his health anymore. It was about hope, about resilience. Rusty wasn't just getting older, he was adapting. And in doing so, he reminded them all that joy doesn't have to end when things get hard. Sometimes, you just have to find a new way to chase the ball. And Rusty, well, Rusty wasn't done chasing. Rusty's return to the park became more than just a one-time visit. It became a symbol. Week by week, his family built a new rhythm around his capabilities, neither pushing too hard nor sheltering him too much. There was a quiet understanding. Rusty had earned his age. He wasn't the puppy who needed to run endlessly to prove something. He was the wise soul who chose his moments, and when he did, they were full of purpose. But even as his mobility improved, Rusty's family remained vigilant. They understood arthritis didn't vanish. It lingered in the background like an old rival, waiting for a chance to make its presence known again. So they doubled down on consistency. His supplements became as routine as the morning coffee. Laser therapy continued, adjusted to every 3 weeks now. His vet, who'd grown genuinely fond of him, would smile when she walked into the treatment room. "My favorite patient," she'd say. And Rusty, now familiar with the routine, would greet her with a gentle nuzzle, then plop down on the therapy table like he'd been doing this his whole life. It was during one of those sessions that a technician asked if they'd considered water therapy. "He's strong," she said, "but in water, he could build muscle without pressure on his joints." His family hadn't thought about it, but the idea felt right. So they enrolled Rusty in hydrotherapy. At first, Rusty wasn't entirely convinced. The therapy pool wasn't quite a lake, and the harness they put on him made him look like he was ready to rappel off a cliff. But the moment his paws touched the water and the tension left his limbs, something clicked again. He moved with a grace he hadn't had in a long time, his legs paddled easily, his head held proudly above the surface as he circled the pool. Hydrotherapy became his new adventure. The sessions brought out the old spark in his eyes. Afterwards, he'd strut around the clinic with a towel draped over his back, greeting the staff like he owned the place. His coat, once a bit dull with age, began to shine again, and even the bounce in his step seemed a little livelier. And then something happened that no one expected. One morning, his human dad woke up to find Rusty at the front door, tail wagging, leash in his mouth. Not waiting to be walked. Asking. Eager. It was as if he'd crossed some invisible line from managing pain to living again. That day, they didn't go to the usual park. They went on a short hike, Rusty's first in over a year. The trail wasn't steep. It wound gently through a forest preserve about 10 minutes from home. Rusty led the way, nose to the ground, inhaling the stories written into the earth by squirrels, deer, and the occasional raccoon. Birds flitted between the trees. The sun filtered down through the leaves in golden shards, painting dappled shadows across his fur. When they reached the lookout, a small rise with a view of the creek below, Rusty sat quietly beside them. For several minutes, no one said anything. There was just the rustle of trees, the chirp of birds, the subtle rhythm of breathing, all of it in harmony. That moment, more than any therapy session or supplement, felt like healing. By now, Rusty's story had started to spread, not far, just within the small world of neighbors and dog walkers, friends who had watched his journey from afar. A woman down the street asked about the laser therapy for her aging Labrador. Another family with a senior beagle stopped them in the park, curious about Rusty's supplements. Rusty had unknowingly become a kind of ambassador for hope, proof that growing old didn't mean growing still. The seasons began to change. Summer gave way to crisp mornings and crunchy leaves. Rusty loved the fall. His coat seemed made for it. He would roll in leaf piles like a pup again, nose buried, tail swishing back and forth like a broom. Winter brought a new set of challenges. The cold stiffened his joints more than usual, and his family watched closely for any signs of regression. They shortened his walks on icy days, made sure his bed was warm, and sometimes even heated up his blanket in the dryer before wrapping him up in it. He got a new orthopedic bed for Christmas. He sniffed it skeptically at first, then sank into it with a groan of pure contentment. And still, the sparkle stayed in his eyes. He celebrated his 11th birthday in the spring with a peanut butter banana cupcake and a party hat he tolerated for exactly 7 seconds. There were balloons, a new squeaky toy, and a candle his family didn't light because they knew he'd try to eat it. In the photos, Rusty looked every bit the senior statesman, wise, well-loved, a little gray around the muzzle, but undeniably joyful. As the years continued, Rusty slowed down again. It was gentle this time, not the sudden onset of pain they'd once feared, but a gradual leaning into rest. He walked less, slept more. The park visits became shorter, but no less meaningful. Sometimes he'd simply lie in the grass and listen. He didn't need to chase squirrels anymore. He was content to just be. And still, they kept up the laser therapy. Still gave the supplements. Not because they expected miracles, but because it mattered. Because he mattered. On his last visit to the clinic, the vet knelt beside him and looked into his eyes. "You've done so well," she whispered, scratching his ears. "You've had such a good life." Rusty looked up at her and blinked, his gaze calm, trusting. He didn't need words. His story had already been told, in wagging tails, in walks reclaimed, in a spirit that refused to fade. When Rusty finally passed, it was quiet, and it was peaceful. His family was there, surrounding him with the same love they'd given him every day since the first. He drifted off wrapped in his favorite blanket, with the scent of home around him and the weight of a life fully lived in every heartbeat. But Rusty's story didn't end there. Even now, his family still hears his paws in the hallway sometimes, not literally, but in memory. The sound of his leash jingling still lingers in the drawer. His tennis ball still rests on the shelf, worn smooth from years of games. And every time they pass the old tree at the park, they smile. Because Rusty didn't just live. He inspired. He reminded them that even when things get hard, when the body starts to ache and the days seem heavy, there is still joy. Still light, still love to give and receive. And sometimes, healing doesn't look like running at full speed. Sometimes it looks like lying in the grass, breathing in the air, and knowing, without doubt, that you are home.